Drones over Denmark and NATO, silent. What is happening in the far north of Europe? In less than 72 hours, 2 Danish airports became the target of alleged drone attacks. One of them a military base with F-16 and F-35 fighter jets. And as if that weren't alarming enough, the police, military and intelligence services are reacting together, a step that is otherwise only taken in terrorist situations. Prime Minister Frederiksen speaks of the most serious attack on Denmark's critical infrastructure, and yet not a word from Brussels, only platitudes from Berlin. But everyone knows that whoever sends drones over NATO territory is deliberately testing boundaries. The only question is, whose boundaries? In the video, you will learn why these seemingly small incidents have enormous explosive power, and why NATO's silence is more frightening than any drone. Because what is brewing here could shake the security order of Europe, and Germany is becoming a dangerously silent follower. Russian aircraft over German frigate, twice. What hardly anyone noticed, at the same time as the drone incidents in Denmark, there was an unprecedented provocation in the Baltic Sea, this time directly against Germany. The frigate Hamburg, part of the NATO Operation Neptune strike, was overflown by Russian reconnaissance aircraft on 2 consecutive days, and not at a safe altitude, but at less than 100 meters, without reacting to radio messages, without warning, without consideration. It was a targeted act of intimidation. Defense Minister Pistorius reacted with sharp words, speaking of an increasing frequency of Russian tests along the NATO borders. But what does that really mean? In truth, the commander of the frigate could do nothing, because according to international law, an attack may only be returned if an immediate attack is believed to be imminent, and even this dangerous low flight is officially not considered as such. This means that Germany's warship, a symbol of security and strength, is openly provoked, humiliated, and must remain silent. No defense, no warning shots, no protection. The Bundeswehr watches, and the public only learns what is allowed. No outcry, no special report, no government statement. It wasn't just any patrol boat, but a central component of Germany's NATO participation. What does Russia want to achieve with such maneuvers? Is it pure muscle flexing, or a targeted strategy to provoke reactions? The answer is more disturbing than any theory. With each further provocation, the Kremlin tests NATO's nerves and the weakness of its reactions, and Berlin sends the signal, we do nothing. But how long can something like this be repeated without someone intervening, or worse, without someone overreacting at some point? Putin's shadow extends to Copenhagen. While Europe is still discussing, Scandinavia has long since become the new front line. Quietly, but relentlessly, what began with a single drone sighting at Copenhagen Airport has escalated into a veritable series in just a few days. No fewer than 5 Danish airports have now reported drone alarms, including military facilities such as Kridstrup Air Base, where F-16 and F-35 fighter jets are stationed. The police are talking about coordinated operations. The intelligence service is investigating around the clock. The military is patrolling. Prime Minister Frederiksen called it an attack on our sovereignty, a sentence that should actually trigger a red alert in NATO, because an attack on one member state affects everyone. Article 5, collective defense. That is the basic principle. But what happens instead? The Danish press reports in detail. International media are picking up on the issue, but from Brussels, silence. From Berlin, appeasement, and from NATO headquarters, radio silence. With each passing hour, the danger grows that these incidents will turn into a military emergency. Because nobody knows exactly who is behind the drones, but everyone is pointing to Russia. 3 suspicious freighters are said to have been nearby, from which the drones may have been launched. But that remains speculation, because despite highly developed radar and defense systems, nobody has yet managed to locate the drones, let alone shoot them down. And that is exactly what is worrying, if even a highly secure NATO member like Denmark is unable to protect its critical infrastructure. What does that mean for the rest of Europe? For Germany? For France? Even more disturbing, the repetition, the patterns, the tactics. Whoever sends drones over civilian and military targets is pursuing a goal: intimidation, chaos, or perhaps a covert message. This is no coincidence, and it is not an exercise. What if these incidents are no longer just being tested, but soon escalate? What if the next drone doesn't just observe, but interferes? What if it is armed? Scandinavia was long the symbol of stability and security, a bulwark of the North. Today it is becoming NATO's weak point, and that right before the eyes of Germany. A Blevekt, because what the Danes are experiencing now could happen tomorrow on the coast of Kiel, Rostock, or Wilhelmshaven. The distance is measured in kilometers, the risk in seconds. Why is Berlin silent when Denmark is screaming? Denmark is calling for protection, for clarification, for plain speaking. But Germany, of all countries, the most powerful country in Central Europe, remains silent. No special letter from the Chancellery, no crisis statement from the Ministry of Defense, no urgency in the tone. The reactions from Berlin seem as if all of this doesn't concern us, as if we were spectators and not directly affected. Yet it was a German frigate that was overflown by Russian aircraft. Germany is the backbone of Europe. And yet radio silence. Why? Officially, it is said that they do not want to judge prematurely. They are working with partners. They need to wait for the results of the investigations. But how many more incidents have to happen before Berlin takes a clear position? When one NATO state after another is targeted, when is the right moment? Defense Minister Pistorius has so far been the only one to openly use the word provocation. But even he avoided concrete demands. No strengthening of air defense, no military response. Not even a special NATO session has been officially requested. Instead, the need for de-escalation is emphasized. But with whom do you de-escalate if the opponent remains anonymous? With drones, with aircraft without markings, or perhaps with oneself? And while police and intelligence services in Denmark are investigating around the clock, the German security apparatus remains surprisingly calm. Yet there are many indications that Germany has long been the target of similar hybrid attacks. More and more voices from the military sector are warning of gray zone attacks, i.e., operations below the threshold of war. Attacks that are not recognized as such and therefore do not provoke a response. That seems to be Putin's game. Testing, provoking, without pressing the red button, and Germany does not react at all. Or worse, is already satisfied with this new form of warfare, because it seems supposedly controllable. But what if the silence is not out of strategy, but out of helplessness? What if Berlin doesn't know how to deal with this type of threat? What if the federal government has long since realized that it has no answer ready, neither military nor diplomatic? And even more dangerous, what if the silence is politically motivated? Because one thing is clear, a public discussion about Article 5, about war, about collective defense would destroy the fragile peace in Germany, would throw the citizens into panic, would put the trust in the new government under march to a hard test. So you keep quiet, you hope, you postpone. But the opponent does not sleep. The drones come back, the planes come closer, the impacts get closer, and while Denmark is arming itself and preparing for the worst, Germany is doing the opposite. They appease, calm down, and repress. But for how much longer? How many warnings does a country need before it realizes that this is no longer a coincidence? Does the NATO alliance case really apply now? If the drones don't stop, what happens then? If the overflights continue, what's next? And above all, when does an incident become an official attack? These questions are currently being asked not only by the Danish government, but by the whole of Europe. Because with each new drone sighting, with each Russian flight maneuver, the pressure on NATO, and thus also on Germany, increases. And with each new drone sighting like way NATO im head on NATO, and thus also on Germany. Article 4 and Article 5. Two inconspicuous paragraphs in the NATO, but they decide on war and peace. Article 4 is activated when a member state sees its security threatened and demands immediate consultation. This article has already been used several times, most recently by Poland, Lithuania, and Turkey. It means it's burning. Talk to us now. Article 5, on the other hand, is the famous alliance case. An attack on one is an attack on all. It is the red line, the last resort, the death knell for military reactions. And now comes the scary part. In Denmark, Article 4 is already being discussed internally. Prime Minister Frederiksen has repeatedly emphasized publicly that the attacks are targeted and serious. Her choice of words is no coincidence. She speaks of sovereignty, of critical infrastructure, of systematic destabilization. These are the trigger words that cause alarm in NATO circles. The next step would be the official consultation. And if this confirms that an external aggressor, such as Russia, is behind it, the transition to Article 5 can be quick. But this is exactly where the problem lies. Article 5 is like a door that cannot be closed once it has been opened. It means troop movements, fighter jets, war preparations, and nobody wants that at the moment. Not Washington, not Brussels, and especially not Berlin, because Germany is in a strategic dilemma. On the one hand, it is legally obliged to provide assistance in the event of an attack. On the other hand, it knows that escalation would be devastating, militarily, economically, socially. A military conflict with Russia, even if it were only fought in the Baltic Sea, would have uncontrollable consequences. Supply chains would collapse, energy prices could explode. The German armaments industry would be overstretched. 100,000 reservists would have to be mobilized. The population, already politically divided, would fall into panic. And that is exactly why the decision is being pushed further and further back. What if the threats cannot be clearly assigned? What if no evidence is found for Russian lines of command? What if the case is deliberately kept open in order not to force a reaction? The truth is, NATO has its back to the wall. Acting means escalation. Not acting means loss of credibility. Because if even a member state whose military airport has been attacked does not receive an answer, what does that say about the value of the alliance? And what does it mean for countries like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, or Poland, which have long been living under permanent threat? A German security expert put it this way: if Denmark demands Article 4 and Germany blocks it, then that is the end of credibility within the alliance. And that is exactly what makes this chapter so explosive. Not only because a drone attack could escalate, but because trust between the states is beginning to crumble. A drone flight is not a world war, but a NATOer who no longer feels safe is the beginning of the end of any alliance. The clock is ticking, the reaction is absent, and the next drone could appear not over Denmark, but over German soil. Drone data destabilization. The hybrid war has begun. What if this isn't a classic war anymore? What if we are already in the middle of it and nobody wants to say it officially? The reality looks bleak. The front line is no longer just between states or armies. It runs invisibly over data lines, over anonymous drones, over targeted manipulation. The hybrid war is here, and Germany is in the middle of it without a strategy, without a shield, without a voice. Drones over airports, Russian aircraft over warships, hacker attacks on administrations, waves of disinformation in social media. All of this is no coincidence. It is part of a comprehensive plan to destabilize Western democracy, step by step, quietly, inconspicuously, and yet mercilessly effective. Russia, China, Iran, they all master this type of warfare, and they know that the West is more vulnerable than ever, because while classic attacks would immediately trigger resistance, a drone flight can easily be denied. A hacker attack can come from anywhere. A false report is just an opinion. That is exactly where the danger lies. The hybrid war uses our own openness against us, our freedom of the press, our rule of law, our slow decision-making processes, and Germany is the perfect target. Largest NATO in Central Europe, economically strong, but militarily understaffed, politically torn, socially tired, new government under march, still without a security policy profile, while other countries have already reacted. With defense systems, cyber commands, new laws, little is happening in Germany. An internal strategy paper of the Bundeswehr, which was recently leaked, warns openly. Germany currently does not have the operational means to effectively ward off a coordinated hybrid attack, and it gets even more explosive. The same paper states that in the event of a coordinated wave of drones over airports, energy centers, and traffic axes, public life would be massively disrupted within 48 hours, with unforeseeable consequences for supply, mobility, and order, and yet no large-scale exercises, no public warnings, no National Security Council. Instead, everyday life, silence, ignorance. The hybrid war makes no ultimates. He sends no tanks. He lets it rain, out of disturbances, doubts, and fear. And Germany relies on luck and the hope of not being next. But how real is this hope? Security services are already reporting suspicious drones over industrial plants in NRW. Unexplained radio interference at railway hubs is already increasing. New fake campaigns are already emerging on the net, deliberately fueling fear of war propaganda from the West. All isolated cases or harbingers, because that is the perfidious thing about shadow war. You never know exactly whether it has already started or is just beginning. And while Germany hesitates, weighs, analyzes, others act. Denmark stations missile defense at airports. Poland activates border troops. Lithuania practices scenarios with NATO forces, and Germany drifts like a ship without a rudder. The question is no longer whether we will be attacked, but when will we even notice? Will Germany be lied into a war? What happens when a country no longer recognizes that it has long since become part of a game? When warning signals are overlooked, facts are relativized, and threats are downplayed. Germany is at a historic turning point, and hardly anyone notices. While the security situation around us is dramatically worsening, Berlin clings to the narrative of control, as if it were all just a temporary storm. But reality speaks a different language. Denmark calls it an attack, NATO calls it escalation, and Germany calls it incidents. This speechlessness is dangerous. It opens up space for repression, for naivety, and for manipulation. Because whoever does not clearly name what is happening allows others to fill the vacuum. Media, opinions, powers with their own interests. Today it is drones, tomorrow it will be hackers, the day after tomorrow, perhaps, tanks or worse, an internal rupture. Because with each day that the population does not receive honest answers, distrust of the government, the media, the institutions grows. Germany is staggering between the danger of war and the truth, and nobody wants to say how close we really are to the border. The warning signals are there. A NATO is calling for help. German warships are being provoked. Security services are sounding the alarm. And yet no clear line, no recognizable strategy. What remains is uncertainty, and this uncertainty is the perfect breeding ground for the next Big Bang. Because this shadow war knows no pause. It exploits every hesitation, every silence, every illusion of security. Therefore the question remains, how much longer can Germany duck before it itself is targeted? And when that happens, who will tell us the truth?